Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, the time has come for the opening panel discussion of Prague European Summit 2021. And the topic of the discussion is one that we simply could not have escaped in the past month, and it's going to be here with us for years to come. Unfortunately, not talking about the coronavirus, who we all hope, I believe, that will be gone as soon as possible, but I'm talking about the European Green Deal as the driver of the post-pandemic recovery. And since we are in the Czech Republic, who is, along with Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland, member of the Visegrad 4, we'll be talking about the new Green Deal in Europe from the Visegrad perspective. And without further ado, I give floor to the moderator of this debate, who is Mr. Kurt de Boef, the editor-in-chief from EU Observer. Mr. de Boef, the floor is yours.
Very much, and thank you very much everyone for attending, everyone here in the public and everyone at home online. This is the first panel, so as a moderator, it's always my honor to explain some technicalities that you have to use probably during the entire conference. The first is the one that under your seat, there's a little paper by which you can download an app which is called Slido. Through this app, you can ask questions which will appear on my screen. And secondly, you can also answer a poll, a question on probably each panel. You can able to say yes or no, and at the end of the panel, I will read the result of the poll. So the questions you can put on this app. It's mainly important for those who are watching at home or not in this public. If you're sitting in this public and you don't like apps, there's also opportunity to ask your questions here live at the speakers. A second technical issue is that you all received a translation machine. It's for Mr. Tanja Meyer, who will speak German. You don't have to put your translation on straight away, but if you push on the on button, you will see it shows then Oric, which means original. So whenever you will hear German, you can put the translation on, and after that you can leave it off, because otherwise you will hear an echo from the speakers and your ear, which is slightly probably unpleasant. So let's go to the content of this opening panel, the first panel of this Prague European Summit. And actually the theme of the panel, which is Recovery, Visegrad Perspective, Post-Pandemic Recovery, couldn't be more timely, because actually this week, tomorrow, Ministers of Economy will first discuss and probably agree on the first package of recovery plans of national states in Europe. And they will agree on the first billions of euros to go to national states to be spent on recovery and green recovery. Secondly, on Wednesday, the Commission will present her Fit for 55 package, which will be an enormous package with enormous legislation and laws in order to make the European Union fit, ready to reach the goal of 55% emissions less in 2030. So the question that we here are going to address about this package is: what is the impact, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities for the Visegrad 4 countries? Also perhaps, what role did they play in the making of these plans and the ambition of these plans? We will also think about how will the future perhaps look like of the Visegrad and Central Europe in general in the future of European Union. And instead of a ever closer union, maybe we can talk now of an ever greener union. I have an excellent panel here of speakers. The first one is you already heard, is Aleš Gmelaš, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic. We have Michal Kiča, State Secretary of Environment of the Slovak Republic. We have online, we will hear Attila Steiner, who is State Secretary for the Development of Circular Economy, Energy and Climate Policy of Hungary. And then we will hear Katja Meyer, who is State Minister of Justice and for democracy, European affairs and equality of the state of Saxony in Germany. Each one of them will have an opening statement of 3 minutes, not much longer, and then we will have, as soon as possible, an interactive discussion. From the last 15 to 10 minutes, we will answer the questions of the public. So please, Gumelaj, it's a difficult name for me. So you have the floor, please.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I will try to stick to the 3 minutes. And first of all, let me maybe define it more geographically, because Visegrad Group is in Central Europe, and it has its differences on the inside also, and also it has its overlaps. So I would maybe talk about the larger Central European perspective, and we have State Minister Katja Mayer here who will talk about the perspective from Saxony also. And I think that there is a sort of Central European perspective, and I would not say that it's specifically a Visegrad perspective. And the one on climate, and specifically on climate policy, is one of an understanding, I think, that it is not just about setting the goals, that it is also about how to get there, and about the very important question, and not a cynical at all, about who bears the costs. In 2018, when the decision on carbon neutrality by 2050 was basically heard and voiced for the first time by the leaders, by the prime ministers and presidents of the governments, of states and governments, there were doubts from the beginning about, how can we go there. It was not just Visegrad countries, it was not just Central European countries. Many countries had questions on how exactly we get there, but then the efforts were put together. And I think that from a Central European perspective, and from several states from Central Europe, there was a sort of reminder of a realism in terms of the costs and how they will be distributed. In that time, there was maybe a sort of stereotype, looking at the Visegrad countries as some or those who don't want to join the climate action. But I think that with time and with the effects in some countries being, for example, the Netherlands in terms of protesters of agriculturals, but also maybe more visibly the Yellow Vests protests in France, I think that the question of costs has come into a center point of the overall climate policy. What we now know, all of us, is that we have to get there. We have to ensure carbon neutral Europe by 2050, but there are still pending questions on how exactly we do this. If we do not focus sufficiently, not just on the interstate distribution of costs, I think this is maybe secondary, but on the intrastate distribution of costs. So who bears the real, I would say, burden of what I like to call reconciliation between nature and humanity, which climate change is a big part of, then we will come into conflicts and we will at the end, or we might at the end fail. So the goal is there, we have assumed it, inside Visegrad, inside Central Europe, but there is still a long way on how exactly we do it and how the costs are distributed. I think that the specific contribution of the Visegrad countries was to somehow remind us that it's not just about setting the goals, it's about the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Allow me just to ask you a small follow-up question.
Sure.
You say it was reminding of not just the goals, but also the way to it. Can you be concrete on this? What, for example, do you mean? I mean, that was, let's say, forgotten in Brussels, that you could add to the discussion that in the end was taken in the entire package?
I think that the most important part of the overall discussion was that the energy mixes in different countries are demanding actually different types of transitions and also different types of transitional means. And this debate was not finished, or it was not even, I would say, started in 2018, but the efforts actually also focused on Visegrad countries, let us be honest, has helped to define the transition means, which are not yet completely there, but there is a progress, and also on acknowledging that some countries with specific geography, but also current energy mix, they need to sustain actually resources which will then have effect on social stability and cohesion in specific regions, for example. It was there, but my impression from the European Council's especially the June or also March 2018, was one that everybody was rushing to have a goal, to say to the electorate, but not to think about the follow-up. And I was afraid, or I'm not afraid anymore, but I think that the Visegrad countries with their, I would say, natural skepticism, and skepticism not in a bad sense, but at looking and trying to see what are the real aspects actually of the climate change policy, they have at the end constructively contributed to achieving the goals, even though they have been in the first moment seen as somebody saying that we do not need to do anything. I think that is now well understood, I hope, and it was in my view, it was a contribution to a debate that is continuing, and I mentioned actually the types of protests that are there and that we have to somehow tackle and adhere. But the energy mixes is the most important part, and I think also somehow getting into a political debate the question of interstate costs, so which regions, which, not social classes, but what type of citizens will bear the costs, I think is very important in this debate.
Okay, that was clear. Please, Michael Kicia, what's your opening words on this theme?
Kurt, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and discuss with you, with all of you, very important topics regarding climate neutrality. To be honest, Visegrad Group wasn't exactly the leader of the fight for the climate neutrality in the past. However, the situation has changed over the last few years, and I'm very pleased by the strong support not only by the government themselves, but also by the general public. For example, a couple of months ago, the Slovak parliament acknowledged one of the largest petitions in Slovak history ever, pushing the government into the stronger effort to address climate challenges and towards climate neutrality. Visegrad countries are similar in many aspects. Our countries have a strong industrial tradition, and this is not only the source of our development and economical growth, but also brings us a possible risk for the sustainability of the development and the state of the environment. All of the Visegrad countries have been trying to face these challenges for some time. I'm convinced that the pandemic situation has only accelerated need for the deep structural reforms. Thankfully, the European Green Deal already provides us with a roadmap transitioning the European Union into modern, climate-neutral, circular, toxic-free, competitive and socially just economy. I'm glad that such a plan is already prepared and approved, because it would be necessary to create it after the COVID-19 global situation anyway. All member states will receive financial resources from the Next Generation EU instrument for the economic recovery and resilience. I'm convinced that we have to use this opportunity to accelerate the green transition. Recovery and Resilience Plan of the Slovak Republic has been approved by the European Commission, and we are already in the process of its implementation. Reforms and investments worth more than 6 billion euros, focused on 5 priority areas: green economy, education, science, research, innovation, health, public administration, and digitalization. More than 1 billion euros will be used for tackling the climate change, decarbonization of industry and transportation, green renovation of buildings, and for the support of the renewables. With these strong instruments, European Green Deal and Recovery and Resilience Plans, and with the strong public support, I believe that the Visegrad and broader Central European region can become the green heart of Europe.
Thank you very much. Allow me also to ask you a question on your points. I mean, you speak about the Visegrad Group, about Central Europe, is there something like a regional strategy or a Visegrad strategy towards the green economy? Or is this something that still needs to grow?
I think what is common for all Visegrad countries is some kind of sensibility for the possible impact of the green transition. We are very sensitive from the maybe the level of our development and economic development. So this is common for all Visegrad countries. I can support what Mr. Chmelaš already said, that we do not ask only the question, what is our goal, but also how to find this goal. Because if we would stop this discussion or this questioning these topics, it can also be problem among the support of our public discussions for the green transitions.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll give the floor to Attila Steiner, who is online with us. Thank you for being here. Please, your ideas on this matter.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and dear ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to participate at today's discussion. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. I think, yes, coronavirus struck us all, and it also distracted significant political attention. However, of course, the European Green Deal, that was one of the flagship initiatives of the European Commission, and it's also important for us in terms of the climate change, what's happening. And we can very much agree with the overall approach that that should also help to recover from the pandemic, and basically it's also a business opportunity, especially for Central Eastern Europe. So therefore, to increase the resilience and the robustness of the economies, I think it's very much welcome that also the European Union allocated 30% of the EU funds for the green transition. And let me also continue where my colleagues finished. I very much agree with them that basically the transition, how this transition will look like, who will finance that, how we will execute this transition, this is a crucial question. Now we are at the halfway of 2050 climate neutrality in terms of the time frame. We always have the reference here, 1990, and after 30 years, we can see that we managed to decrease emissions by 20% in the European Union. And of course, to reach climate neutrality, we will need increased efforts. But it will be a huge challenge for our economies. For example, in Hungary, in order to meet climate neutrality, we have to abandon natural gas from the heating system, which is a particular challenge for us since almost each household is connected currently to the natural gas network. And in the households, heating is ensured by natural gas. So this shows also very clearly the magnitude of the challenge. And I think what is important for us, but for the whole region, that in the meantime, of course, we are very determined to meet this climate neutrality objective. However, other aspects of the energy landscape, like energy prices and supply security, shall be also ensured. And since energy is input for our economy, so therefore competitiveness issues shall be also considered when we are moving forward to meet climate neutrality objective. And therefore this careful planning and basically to see what will be the impact of the green transition on economy and society, this is crucial for us, and that's what my colleagues already mentioned. And this is particularly important to maintain the public support for the green transition, because of course everybody would agree that yes, we should be climate neutral by 2050 in 30 years, but if it will significantly increase the costs for households, if it would significantly increase the input prices for economy, then I think we would face a very challenging situation to carry on this very ambitious program. So therefore, this careful planning and to respect also and take into consideration these other aspects like competitiveness, the price issue, and the supply security issue, together with the green transition, this is the challenge ahead of us. Thank you.
I'm wondering, I mean, from what I heard from, let's say, 3 Visegrad countries, actually, I mean, are there any challenges that are specific or that are larger or bigger or more challenging in the Visegrad countries than in the rest of the EU? I mean, this is something that you would say, like, this is something we have to deal with, that other countries are dealing, is much less dealing with it, or have to deal with, in order to have this green transition in the right place?
I think what is a significant difference, this is the development level of the Visegrad 4 countries and of course the Central Eastern European region at all, because we have significantly less resources for mobilization, and also the infrastructure, the quality and quantity of infrastructure is also different. We have the communist heritage, for example. This is very visible on the natural gas pipelines, that each country was directly linked to Moscow, basically, in case of natural gas. And to make this reform, to make the networks connected, that required significant investments on our side, and that was not the situation, for example, for Western European countries. So I think this is a significant difference, and of course, this is a starting point, and we have to cope with this situation. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't do anything. In the opposite, we should be very ambitious, but we have to do it very carefully.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I'd like to give the floor to Katja Meijer, excuse me. Please, again, take your translation and just put on, and normally the English translation should be clear and ready. Please, you have the floor.
Vielen Dank. Erstmal auch vielen Dank von meiner Seite, dass ich die Gelegenheit habe, heute bei diesem europäischen Gipfel teilzunehmen, an dem Tschechien hier der Ausrichter ist. Und ich glaube, es ist jetzt schon bei den Statements klar geworden, dass wir alle miteinander ein Ziel vor Augen haben, nämlich die Frage, wie wir den europäischen Green Deal, wie wir die Klimaneutralität gestalten können. Und ich glaube auch vor dem Hintergrund der Erfahrung des letzten Jahres, was die Corona-Pandemie angeht, haben wir alle miteinander
has told us quite a lot. It is very important to closely cooperate, to exchange information in order to overcome various crises. So one of the key issues for both our generation and our world, the following generation, is fighting actually climate change and being active in this relation. We have to be ambitious, and I also do believe that the European Union, the European countries themselves do have to push this topic forward, do have to push forward environmental friendly issues, and we have to be a role model for other countries as well. Taking a look at polls, European citizens tell us we're not doing enough. This is why I'm very pleased to hear that the European Commission and the European Council have made a step forward, actually agreeing on a climate change, or rather an environmentally protection law, which focuses on climate change as such. Taking this topic seriously, meaning climate change and environmentally friendly approaches, then this is a precondition not only for future generations, but also for economy as such. And the economic potential of the Green Deal and environmentally friendly topics is actually quite significant. And he who becomes aware of this takes the advantage of topics as such. It would be actually my dear wish to push these topics forward, and this only will work if we go hand in hand, pull at one rope, if we actually cooperate. This means both in research and development, between research and development and the economy, both within individual countries and on an international level, meaning between Germany and Czech Republic, for example, as well as other countries. And we do have to have some space for the transitional period in order to buffer the social issues, which also have been mentioned by the previous speakers. The social fund has actually provided for the resources to tackle these issues. I'm very pleased that Hungary is actually now planning to close down its coal energy plants, and we are focusing more and more on renewable energy. Of course, even Saxony has its challenges following the revolution in 1919. There have been many mines closed, many coal works closed, and this transformation is something we are focusing on as well. Our economy, the Saxon economy, is facing this as well. Saxony is also producing many cars. This again poses another economic topic. If the European countries decide not to have any combustion engines from, let's say, 2030 or 35, then this is a clear economic issue, meaning that we have to provide for the proper transformation processes. And we as Germany are, I think, a good example for that, because there is not supposed to be any non-E-supported or E-drive supported car from within a very close time. And I do not believe that we have already achieved what we actually planned. The German Institutional Court has said that the Environmental Protection Act is actually unconstitutional and that it has to be adapted so that future generations can also live in freedom, so to say. And I also believe that following the next elections to the German Bundestag, meaning the German Parliament, we will be able to focus on these topics not only within Germany but also on an international level and together.
I will pose it in English, actually. I mean, you talk, of course, about all these interconnections that are there and which are obvious, no? I mean, but I was actually wondering, in the region, I mean, in the state of Saxony, is there also some kind of feeling that you are part of this this Central Europe? I mean, we are talking about Central and Eastern Europe. I mean, let's say officially you're not part of it, but I mean, do you feel emotionally part of it?
Well, we are sort of in the middle of it, so to say. Talking about environmental protection topics and CO2 issues, it's not a national level, but it's more or less about international issues. For example, Zgorzelec or Görlitz, there are certain thermal heating plants or earth heating plants which are addressing this. So there is nothing like a paternalistic approach, but it's also about other countries profiting from the experience the certain countries have already done, and there are processes which are actually ongoing. We are still learning, we are still exiting the atomic energy. Nevertheless, we do have to push forward the discussion. It's worth going on and discussing furthermore, discussing the path Germany has chosen so that others can profit from it, from our experience.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I go to other questions, I was actually first wondering if some of you had a follow-up comment on something your colleague said, or a question of mine that you think should be addressed to you as well, and some comments or other themes that you want to address? No? Well, actually, I have already quite a few questions, so we for sure have enough questions. Actually, perhaps one interesting one for, each one of you is one of the questions most, because people have, it's anonymous so far, so people try to get their name, it's not very easy. Is that there's a lot of skepticism, one of the questioners says, among the public and the V4 countries about climate change and EU ambition and so forth. How would you see in the coming months and years, how would you try to curb this skepticism and share a bit of people's, let's say, feeling of that it's urgent, the urgency of it. So maybe if I can give the word to you, Mr. Gmelas.
Okay. Well, that's a very good question. First of all, I would maybe try to rehabilitate the word skepticism, because skepticism has been for a very long time understood as a no-saying, or no-sayers were skeptics. And Eurosceptic is up to today somebody who refuses Europe. But when we talk about skepticism from the Visegrad countries, or from specific countries actually inside the EU on the climate question, I think at no moment it was a skepticism about the climate change itself or about the need to tackle the issues, but it was an attempt to see into detail about the tools, about the costs, as I talked about this. And I think that the same applies here for the population. The same applies for citizens. We have, in the past 20 years, roughly maybe 15 or 10, we have gone through the most serious droughts, relatively speaking, of course, but still for Central Europe, relative dry years. Just, a couple of weeks ago, we had a tornado of a size of what you tend to see only in the United States, in southern Moravia. We have soil erosion that is really an issue that people think about every single day, and all these issues are linked to climate change. Not to talk about, for example, migration, not to talk about serious global issues that will, or security issues that will go with the climate change. So there is a realization that climate change is happening, that we need to do something, but at the same time, and what is difficult in this debate is that even if we stop to produce CO2 today, it will take years, maybe decades, for the climate to recalibrate in a way. So the costs that we spend today will realize its benefits actually in the very long future, and this is very difficult to explain. This needs maybe a common understanding that this is necessary for the next generation, that this is necessary for the nature, for what I said I consider as a sort of reconciliation between nature and humanity. And this is much more a value-based issue, maybe. The capacity to bear the costs if the benefits are here for the future. And in a democratic system, we are faced with elections every 4 years, which means that the benefits will always be somehow, or the costs of today will always be visible, and the benefits of the future will not be so visible. So we will have hurdles, we will have issues, but we still have to address the redistribution costs, as I talked about them slightly in my introduction. Because if the citizens see that they are the only ones who bear the costs, that, for example, corporate sector is not bearing the costs at all, if we see that there is a selective, I would say, approach, now most prominently visible in terms of exclusion of inside the proposal on ETS enlargement, on kerosene, the exclusion of private jets, for example, which is kind of resonating in many political circles. This is exactly the wrong symbol or the wrong signal that we send to the citizens, that they will again actually only bear the costs for the others. So I'm not sure I answered actually your question. I just said it's going to be difficult, but the redistributive question is key, and we've heard it actually here from Michal, that if we do not address those issues, certainly they will kick back at some point. They will kick back in elections, not in Central Europe. They might kick back in elections in other countries, and then the goal that we have set in 2018 will somehow evaporate in difficult political situations inside Europe, and the overall goal will not be maybe shared by the next generation. So this is a key issue, and I think my only usable solution or answer would be to mind the redistributive costs of the burden sharing, maybe, of the climate change policies.
Thank you. Perhaps Mr. Attila Steiner, do you have anything to add about it, or have another perspective on this? What do you think about it? The skepticism and the difficulty about it at the public.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to continue what Mr. Kmelář said. And actually, I believe that the majority of the citizens would like to preserve the nature and environment for their children and grandchildren. And we also face here in Hungary very often extreme weather conditions. Especially the last week, we had very heavy rain unexpectedly. So I think now people are realizing on its own that basically climate change is happening, and we don't have 30, 40, 50 years. And a second aspect, that during the pandemic and during the quarantine, I think several families and people at home had special attention on their neighboring environment, and that could also help the issue of and the topic of climate change and climate protection. From the government side, I think we have to establish, so make awareness, of course, and we have to have such a legislation which promotes and enables citizens to be active on that. And of course, we have to establish some support schemes for citizens to for them to get to know new technologies which could help to realize the fight against climate change. And here in Hungary, we introduced last year a program, Climate and Nature Protection Action Plan, with very concrete elements. And it's very well perceived by citizens, and it contains very concrete projects. For example, we support the purchase of electric cars. We introduced a lot of electric buses in several cities across Hungary, and basically citizens could have a personal experience how these new technologies look like, and they don't have to be afraid of these new technologies. On the contrary, this could also increase the living conditions. And for that, I think at this stage, the financial support and the support schemes are crucial. Thank you.
Another question that is pretty popular, I think, is it's not an easy one, but I'm sure you can answer it, Michael, because as you also background as an environmental lawyer, if I'm right. So I will actually read it for you. As we have seen in the introductory video, combustion engine cars are still center stage. I mean, pun. So what is the vision for decarbonization of transport? I mean, probably one of the key questions, I think, well, not for just for the V4, but for Europe and the world in general. Do you have any answer to that question?
It's a serious question in Slovakia because we have a big problem with emissions also. The age of our cars is not sufficient, I think, and also, and this is the reason why we are planning to spend a lot of funds from the Recovery and Resilience Plan for the further development of the railways. Another question that is very specific for the Slovakia is that we have a strong dependence from the automotive industry. As you already know, we have 4 big automotive factories in Slovakia, so we see these questions as a potential risk for the future. And also, I'm very curious about the new proposal of the legislation, Fit for 55, and also I hope that it will provide, and the European Commission will provide also more specific answer for the specific situation of countries like Slovakia regarding the diesel motors.
Okay, thank you. And before I turn to the public and ask if there are some questions that are not online but live, one more question from the online forum to you, Katja Meijer. Actually, I mean, I'd also just read it. How would the panel address accusations from the younger generations that the generation which brought about the climate change is penny-pinching green solutions? I mean, for the translators, so they all say it's not enough. So, and that what we are doing, or let's say, the younger generations are saying that we are just like trying to save too much, what is indeed dirty, and if we don't do enough, that the world will collapse anyway. So, what is the answer to that?
Ja, die junge Generation hat recht.
Young generation is correct. It's right what they are saying. We have advanced, we have adopted climate protection legislation on the European level and also in Germany. However, it is not sufficient what has been done so far. It is not sufficient to achieve the decarbonization of the entire continent. We have to tackle these problems at the global level. I am sure that Mr. Biden, the new U.S. president, has found the right way on the track to the new climate policy, and I'm sure that we will be able to close the gap between our continents and join forces to reach our joint targets. So the question is not what our objectives are, the question is how to achieve them. More electro mobility is one of the answers, and on the other hand, we have to present alternative solutions. We have to develop our railways. For example, another example is our agriculture. Large funds are being invested in this sector. Ecological farming will be also crucial. The agriculture also deserves funding.
Some people are asking, like, what about all these youth organizations that are fighting for climate change, and how can governments actually engage them more in order to reach solutions, but also perhaps to convince the public that might be skeptic, how, whatever you define skepticism, of course. So, but let me come back to that later. First of all, are there any live questions in the public for the old way with raising your hand and getting a microphone and asking the questions? They're in the back, yes. A lady in the back. So please say your name and briefly introduce yourself in one phrase, and then very briefly what your question is, okay?
Thank you. So, do you hear me?
Perhaps best to put the mask away, so for clarity.
Sure.
Thank you.
So, indeed, it changes. So, my name is Leah, I'm French, and I'm here as part of the FELF, so the Forum for Young European Leaders. And so thank you for all of your input. I had a question specifically on growth, and you talked about technologies, but I wanted to ask you if there was a place in your agendas for degrowth on specific sectors. I do not speak German, so I'm sorry I did not understood what you said, so I might have missed something. But do you think growth, as we experienced it, is the only way so far to tackle climate change? And if not, is there something you are planning to do about it? Thank you.
Sorry, the question was to whom? Okay, let me have a second question I saw here in the front. I even saw two in the front. Okay, and then we'll have three questions. Yeah, sir?
Thank you very much, Ivan Horec from Aspen Institute. I have a question to our Slovak friend. You have said that the automotive industry is extremely important for your economy. In fact, your economy stands and falls with the automotive industry. And you have said that you expect that in the package that should be approved tomorrow, there will be measures to help you to keep the automotive industry. Can you please tell me or tell us what do you expect, what do you like to have, what are your wishes in order that the automotive industry really stays in Slovakia, keeps the jobs, and keeps also global competitiveness? Thank you very much.
Can you give the microphone to the lady behind you for the last question? Yeah.
My name is Jaroslava Bránova. I have one question to Ministry Káťa Majer, because I was working many years in medicine, and I have one question in pandemic.
Can I interrupt you? Because the sound is not superb. Can you just talk slowly, please?
Such is good.
Just talk slowly.
I have one question to Káťa Majer. In post-endemic period and post-endemic recovery would be equal cost of the medicine method or therapy in each country of European Union, or only in the Schengen space country in Union. For example, if one operation surgery costs in Germany, for example, 4,000 euro, and in Czech Republic costs only 500 euro. It will be comparable in the post-period post-endemic period in EU.
Did each one of you hear the questions, or? It was so. Because did you hear the first question? So just asking because the sound was not very well.
I understood that the question was whether something is the only way to tackle climate change.
Technology.
Technology, okay.
Yeah. I believe that's right, no? Sorry, I have to speak talking about it. Yeah, sorry, just we have to make sure that the panelists at least know the answer. So if you can just briefly and slowly repeat your...
Sure. So my question in a few words was, do you think growth is the only way to tackle climate change?
Growth.
Growth, yes.
Okay. And there was a specific question to you?
Regarding the automotive industry.
I'll give you the floor.
Okay. As I already said, we realize the importance of the automotive industry for the Slovak economy. The solution is definitely based on the support of the innovation in the industry, automotive industry specifically, support new technologies and research, deeper strengthen the research in this area. Slovak government provides a lot of incentives for the the automotive industry. And however, this is not questions that is asked only specifically for the Slovak government, but for all governments and all states that are depending from the automotive industry. And we also support a lot of further technologies and new technologies, the research and technologies and batteries and electromobility, for example. And I think that this is the answer for the automotive industry, not only in Slovakia, but in every country that have this strong tradition.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I believe the technology, the growth question was mostly addressed to you, no?
Okay, so, I mean, it's a difficult question indeed, but in principle, growth is, well, technically speaking, it's not the only way how to tackle climate change. On the contrary, this is for the past, let's say, 180, 200 years, economic growth was associated with higher CO2 emissions, which is only now somehow getting disrupted or decoupled. At the same time, growth is the best possible way how to ensure, at least in principle again, that the social fabric and the redistribution will not create conflicts inside society. I will try to explain very briefly. If you have zero growth or degrowth or negative economic growth, then necessarily somebody is getting, in principle, poorer. Somebody can get richer, and it will, I mean, due to inflation measures and due to, I mean, by principle, somebody will get richer, but somebody will get poorer. And this will create friction inside the society, which will most probably then disrupt the trend of the degrowth through political process. I mean, I'm very abstract in a way, but I think that we have to, in order to be able to sustain the social fabric and cohesion of society, growth is, despite all the inefficacies and potentially causing, natural catastrophes, is still the only way how to pursue in economic terms. The first, I think, and most important question is how we can decouple growth from CO2 or in general pollution or in general, let's say, harming the nature. And I think that there the technology is there to help, but not necessarily the only panacea. And there are still very strong and difficult, I would say, choices in front of us in terms of, and I'm coming back again to the redistribution question, about who will bear the costs of the transition and how exactly the growth structure will be distributed indeed. And let me just very shortly talk about automotive, because it is a very key question also for I mean, a wider Central European region. And this is, I think, something very tangible when you see the citizens' skepticism to get materialized, because what we see is that up to maybe 8% of our GDP is directly or indirectly linked to the automotive industry. It might be less, it might be more. I'm just, launching a number of a general number. If this gets transformed into, for example, electrical cars, most of the added value actually does not stay in the territory due to the fact that, batteries are important, but also because it's less labor efficient. I'm stating the obvious, everybody in the room actually knows. Then the people are afraid because they see that there is a certain added value that was and is produced here will somehow get produced somewhere else. What they see as an alternative is money somewhere, anonymous money from the EU, maybe from private investors, but they do not see what they will do tomorrow. If I lose my job in the automotive or in an ordinary light or heavy industry that is linked to the automotive, what will I do tomorrow? Will I vote for somebody who's promising me anonymous, bulk of money with not a concrete, realization of what it could do? How will I get employed? What it will mean to me? Then we will never have, I think, a consent or a full consent of the society.
Okay, we have actually 2 minutes left. So, Ms. Meyer, can you briefly perhaps give an answer to the question of the lady? At 1 minute?
Yeah. Vielleicht trotzdem noch mal ganz kurz zurück zum Skeptizismus. Also ich glaube, dass
I would now like to re-mention skepticism because it's an issue we have to take very, very seriously. How can we, on this way to the transformation, focus on it? It is essential, while we are actually pushing forward renewable energies, to let the citizens chip in, to inform them. This is what policymakers have to do. In Germany, we've actually done this regarding the wind energy plants, specifying where they can actually be built. We are informing our citizens, and we want them to profit from renewable energies as well. Regarding the medicine sector, we have also figured, and this refers especially to Czech Republic and Germany, that closing the borders has a tremendous effect, especially in the border areas, as many Saxon hospitals are relying on Czech nurses or doctors, which in turn is correlating to the salary, of course. And the European Commission has started to focus on the EU minimum salary in order to provide for a minimum payments everywhere in Europe.
Thank you. I promise to come back on one last question, and this one is for you, Attila Steiner, which is a question: how can governments actually involve more these youth movements that are fighting for climate? How can we do that? I mean, or how can you do that? And if possibly, I know it's a big question, but if you could be very brief and try in 1 minute to give this organization some hope.
I think, of course, education and the activities in the school are very important, and of course the patterns, what children see in their families. I think this is crucial, but I'm very optimistic because the young generation is very conscious about that topic. But I think for them to understand that, yes, as I mentioned earlier, very rapid moves without any background calculation, and to see it as a system that could cause unwanted side effects, and to avoid that, I think that's our role from the government part. But I think maybe one short reflection on the growth question. This is exactly the topic, how to decouple the growth from CO2 emissions, and basically the whole European Green Deal, and with all of the EU funds to kickstart economy is about that. And I think here we have huge untapped potential if you think about, for example, the move towards circular economy, which is a big opportunity, but also research and development and new emerging technologies like hydrogen, for example. So I'm very optimistic that we have still several things to implement, which will help us to deliver all of these objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me end this discussion as promised with the poll. And 39 people have voted, so it's the first poll. I mean, that will be better. And the question was, is the Visegrad region going to be able to keep up with the rest of the EU and actually reach the goal of 55% within the given time frame? A bit ago, it was almost 60 that said no, and less than 40 that said yes, and the yes is climbing up, which means that the panel, if we would continue for half an hour more, probably would have convinced at least a majority of the people listening. So thank you for that, and well, I mean, there's a lot of work to do, we all know that, but thank you for this excellent panel. Alec Gmelars, Michael Kiesche, Attila Steiner and Katja Meijer. Thank you so much, and thank you, public, for joining us with many questions. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to answer them all. But with this, I'd like to give the word back to the main organizer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep this with me.
Thank you for the word, Mr. De Boef, and also thank all the guests for the inspiring words we could have heard.